Now, matriculants across the country are currently writing their prelim exams. The Basic Education Department has long been criticized for the country's matric pass rate, with rights groups and political parties saying the number does not take into account South Africa's high dropout rate. For more on this, I'm joined by the Deputy Chairperson of the Education for Social Justice Foundation, Hendrick, Makaneta, as well as Xolani Fakude, Head of Secretariat at the South African Democratic Teachers Union. Gentlemen, very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your time and weighing in on a very concerning very concerning matter in the education system. I mean, there are reports of 45% of South African learners dropping out of school before reaching matric. Hendrick, just starting with you, because we're in studio together, what do you make of this number?
Well, Paul, this number is quite huge, and we've raised it on several occasions with Basic Education Minister to say that the high dropout rate within the terrain of education, in particular basic education, is a cause for great concern. And it is unfortunate that at this point the department has not been able to account for this high number of learners who are suddenly absent in the system. Of course, we know that there are many factors that affect learners in the terrain of education. There are learners who come from child-headed families. There are also learners who are affected by a wide range of factors, girl learners who sometimes, are not able to cope. Issues of pregnancy at school level, which affect teenagers who happen to be learners, and of course a wide range of other factors as well. But what we would like to see happening is that government must commit itself to find these learners wherever they are, to collaborate with their parents, and to make sure that we bring them, we integrate them back into the basic education system so that they too can be able to create a better future for themselves.
Yeah. Let me bring Xolani into the conversation. As we speak about these numbers, perhaps it's important to understand the breakdown. What does the dropout really account for? Are we speaking about people who have the option, pupils who have the option to leave school? I think it's in grade 10, a school leaving certificate that is still issued out. What is your understanding?
Well, thank you. First, let me greet you, Paul. Let me greet the viewers and then Dr. Makaneta there in studio. Our understanding of the crisis is that literally, and we can never overemphasize this, literally we are sitting on the verge of what we can call a generational catastrophe. And whilst the COVID pandemic might have also accelerated some of the inequalities that are there in the education system, but it is also worth noting that even before the COVID pandemic, we had about 230,000 to 300,000 learners already exiting the system before matric. Now, we've got, or rather we are advised by some of the experts that actually the crisis is within grade 10. They call it the grade 10 crisis. And there is a number of factors. There are some extrinsic factors, there are some intrinsic factors, but then there are also what could be classified, which seem to be in the majority, push-out factors. And this is really related to policy. This is whereby learners feel compelled or are compelled to leave even before matric so that the matric pass rate is not necessarily affected. But now this is where this comes into a very important point. That says that then what then becomes the focal point of our basic education system. It cannot be that the focus is only on about ticking the box, and then you've got schools that are judged, their performance is judged on a manner that is even oblivious of some of the socio-economic factors that even affect our learners. So our view as a union as well, that Makaneta is correct, is that the Department of Basic Education must be held accountable for its learner retention strategy, how it is funded. But also, we need to take responsibility as society. We need to take responsibility as communities, and we need to actually work on also improving the parental involvement in the case of our basic education system.
In improving the parental involvement, I mean, we've seen in recent weeks criminal incidents happening at school, and in some schools, parents have actively come in to try and find solutions around the problems. But just trying to factor in the role of the community, the teacher, and the pupil themselves in trying to take some form of responsibility in saying, perhaps, I have such a challenge, I would like to continue school, but how do they vocalize that, whatever challenge it is? You make mention of pregnancy being a huge factor here, which we have seen. The numbers are frightening.
Yes, definitely. I think that as we speak, Paul, there is no proper collaboration between parents and teachers or education authorities, particularly in township schools as well as schools in rural areas. If you look at private schools, that is where there is a high involvement of parents. That is where there are no issues. These issues of dropout rates affecting the main public schools, which are found mainly in poor communities. And I think that you are correct. We need to really find a way to ensure that even our SGBs are trained in such a way that they collaborate on a daily basis or almost regularly with our communities to make sure that they put the interests of learners first. Learners are members of the communities, and of course, whatever happens in terms of crime, whatever happens in the community will obviously also find a way, to creep into the school environment. Yeah. And of course, the issue also of, vandalizing of schools. I mean, you will recall that during the July unrest in KZN alone, more than 32 schools were vandalized. And these are schools that are found in communities. So we really need to ensure, that parents get actively involved in protecting the general well-being of our learners. I mean, during the apartheid era, for instance, some of the schools which are found in rural areas were built by parents themselves. And that is why back in the days, parents were able to guard these schools from, acts of vandalism or arson. But these days, government is injecting a lot of money into building schools. And there's a problem because some of the parents or some of the community members actually see the schools as structures that belong to government. They detach themselves from what is actually happening in schools because they are not involved at all. Yeah. They are not contributing anything. So even if things go wrong at the school level, they don't really feel that pain. Unlike back in the days where some of the parents, as I've said, used to contribute and take material into building schools. So generally, we have a duty to make sure, because education on its own is a triangle that requires the collaboration of learners, parents, as well as teachers. And until we get that triangle right, we will continue to face these challenges that we face even today.
Yeah, absolutely. Xolani, just bringing you back into the conversation here. You gave us some insight, perhaps, on what this means for the future of these pupils who are dropping out. What does it speak to when it comes to accessing decent jobs? If you drop out of school, how are you going to get decent work? I mean, we saw it with the unemployment figures, mentioning the cohort of 15 to 24-year-olds who are not being able to access jobs, speaking to a very concerning aspect also.
You're absolutely correct, Paul. I mean, we can never overstate the importance that the basic education system has to even play in the context of our economic development. One thing that we want to emphasize as a union as well is that our communities need to understand quite pointedly the effect also that as school dropouts have in the context of socio-economic development. What is clear and what is clearing, and it is also quite mentioned very seriously in the National Development Plan, is that education is an apex priority. And I also like what Makaneta is saying, in that we all need to take responsibility. When you look at the school dropouts or the incidents of school dropouts in this case, you then must ask yourself that what is it that we're giving in as a public, as a community as well, to make sure that our schools actually are optimal in terms of the environment. School safety is one of those issues. And by the way, some of the factors that even lead to school dropouts are not only resulted to what we call the push-out factors, which could be policy-related, which we thought we emphasized should be looked into, but some of them are even related to how an individual learner interfaces with the immediate schooling communities. For instance, we've got incidents of bullying, cyberbullying, etc. We've got incidences whereby learners do not even feel safe within a particular school. And therefore, that is an indictment on all of us actually as South Africans. And like I said at the beginning, that we cannot overestimate or overstate the importance or the impact that basic education has in the context of socio-economic development. Of course, we are correct, Mpo. Our employment numbers make for a sad story for reading. They are very bad, especially when you look into the cohort that you are mentioning, 15 to 24, you would realize that actually we are sitting on the verge of a catastrophe. When you've got so many young people not either being in education, training, or employment, and you would know that most of those would not be in any of education or training opportunities because they would have dropped out around the grade 10 level. It tells you indeed that we all need to do far much more better in terms of how we collaborate. And one last thing, it is also important for us to look into interventions such as psychosocial support services that we are availing in schools. So whilst we do have got strategies that even refer to early warning systems around how teachers themselves can even see if there are behavioral challenges towards a learner and so forth, but it also becomes important as well that we've got a systemic approach in terms of how we deal with some of these issues. And of course, the dropout rate becoming one of those, which is very, very concerning.
Yeah. Just very quickly wrapping up here, as we speak about perhaps some solutions when it comes to ensuring that there's an enabling environment for pupils to go to schools and feel that even if they're not doing too well or they're experiencing some other personal challenges, that the system is strategized in such a way that is enabling in allowing the learner to return and find it an environment that is encouraging for them to learn.
Definitely, Mpo. In January this year, we attended the Basic Education Lekotla, which was called by Minister Njimutseka. And in that Lekotla, we, as delegates, we agreed that there is a need to modernize our education system because everyone can see that learners go into the system which is really failing them in a sense that our grade 12 learners, once they leave the system, they are in the long queue of unemployment. Those who don't make it to universities, they are affected. It's a pyramid. It's more like those graduates who are coming from, some of whom are coming from a tertiary level. There are those who are also affected by unemployment, which is structural, by the way, because there are jobs that are there, but the problem is the skills. The basic education system does not produce the skills that are required by our economy. And right now, as we move into the fourth industrial revolution, there is a need for our education system, in actual fact, the curriculum, to be modernized so that learners can be advanced. They can be able to evolve because, the world is evolving. Yeah. It can't be correct that we continue to provide those subjects that are not going to help our learners and provide them with the necessary skills. I know that there are some of the NGOs, which have started, issues of coding and robotics, but it's not throughout the country. We would like to see a situation whereby all learners in our country are able to have access, to connectivity, so that even during, weekends or during pandemics, yes, they can be able to also learn from home, just like learners who are in private schools. But currently, we still have a long way to go to ensure that we modernize the system, but also to provide the necessary resources so that our learners can be able to create a future for themselves.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Let me thank you both, gentlemen, Hendrick Makaneta, Deputy Chairperson for the Education for Social Justice Foundation, as well as Xolani Fakude, Head of Secretariat at SATU, speaking to the very important issue around school dropouts in South Africa.